Good afternoon, everyone. Today is Wednesday, November 6th. It's the day after Election Day 2024, and big changes in the world of politics as well as the world of governance and policy. We're going to be talking about broadband, and we're going to talk specifically about an issue involving um, carrier handsets and mobile phone unlocking. I guess you could consider it an issue deep in the weeds, but it's also an issue with a lot of resonance among consumers and the users of phones. So we're going to hear from our expert panel in just a few minutes about the role of the Federal Communications Commission's proposed rule regarding mobile service providers and the requirements to unlock consumers' phones within 60 days of activation. But before we do, I just want to remind everyone that Broadband Breakfast is a news and events community. We're focused on better broadband, better lives. We bring people together around these goals through reporting and through community interaction through these free weekly Broadband Breakfast Live online forums, which we've been doing for nearly 5 years now, and through in-person events. We actually have been planning for several weeks, actually months, almost 2 months, to do an event, Broadband in the Next Administration. It is, of course, now Broadband in the Trump Administration. This event, which will take place on Thursday, December 12th, in person, Washington, D.C., will feature officials, including former officials who worked in the last Trump administration, as well as people who are currently in government at the National Telecommunications and Information Administration and potentially and likely other government agencies as well. We're going to be tackling four topics: BEAD, the future of the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Program; spectrum reauthorization; the future of the Universal Service Fund and or Affordable Connectivity Program; and regulatory issues like net neutrality, digital discrimination, and their fate in the new legal landscape. We hope you'll go to Broadband Breakfast, click on Next Administration to sign up to attend the event and to participate. I also want to highlight again, we do this free event online every Wednesday at 12 noon Eastern time. We're doing an event next week on BEAD allocations and the process that the state broadband offices are taking as they deploy those BEAD allocations. And we could not do our weekly free events without the support of sponsors, including Utopia Fiber, Comcast, Ookla, Wesco, Coos Systems, the Institute for Local Self-Reliance's Community Broadband Networks Initiative, the California Emerging Technology Fund, G-Fiber, Broadband Now, CostQuest, ACA Connects, and NCTA, the Internet and Television Association. Thank you to our sponsors. And as a final reminder, since these events are freely available, we do ask for becoming a member of the Broadband Breakfast community to access the videos of our in-person conferences, to have unlimited access to all the news and content on Broadband Breakfast, as well as premium charts, data, and exclusive reports. These are all available on Broadband Breakfast. We hope you'll sign up for free membership in the Broadband Breakfast community and take the plunge to be a Broadband Breakfast Club member. More information is available on Broadband Breakfast. Let's go ahead and open up the floor to all of our attendees here, and I will introduce them. We're going to be able to hear opening remarks from each of them. As a reminder, we really strive to keep our events as well as our opinion pages open to all perspectives. We invite all perspectives. We don't always get all perspectives in our event, but we certainly make that effort. And we are grateful we do have a variety of viewpoints who come at this issue from different angles. And as we kind of unfold the aspects of this issue, the role of of advocates who see this as a way to enhance competition and digital equity, versus critics who caution that it would upend affordable phone programs and pave the way for increased smartphone fraud. Those are at least some of the issues, some of the different perspectives on the topic. We're going to be, again, hearing from each of our four panelists on their perspectives on this topic. And I've also just teed up and asked them if they chose to address, with a change in administration, particularly from the Biden-Harris administration we've been in, and the Federal Communications Commission led by Jessica Rosenworcel, to a second Trump administration, and whatever role or whatever chairman is selected at the Federal Communications Commission. I am interested in asking your opinion on, is this one of the items that would fall by the wayside in a future, in the Trump administration come January 20th? Or is this the kind of thing that A, is going to get done before then, or B, has enough resonance in a bipartisan fashion? So that's just a question. You're welcome to answer now, or we can tackle it in the Q&A that will follow. Let me introduce each of our four panelists. We're going to hear first from Jeff Blum, who's Executive Vice President for External and Government Affairs at EchoStar. And Jeff oversees public policy, regulatory, and government affairs in Washington. And before joining EchoStar, which was also called Dish until recently, in 2005, that's when he joined EchoStar Dish. Jeff was a partner in Davis Wright Tremaine, which hardly needs an introduction to the world of telecommunications policy. Jeff, thank you so much for being a part of this discussion. Next up will be Tamara Price. you got me focused on your first name, Tamara, and how to pronounce it. How do you say your last name? Oh, and you're on mute. Oh, we got to make sure we get you unmuted there. All right. I'll make sure we can help you with that. We obviously want to hear from you. But Tamara is Vice President of Federal Regulatory and Legal Affairs for Verizon, and she represents Verizon before the FCC and before other federal agencies, as well as Congress, on regulatory and policy issues, including wireless, video, and universal service. I'm assuming she's leaving to come back. She joined Verizon in 2008 after 10 years at the FCC, including chief of the pricing policy division in the Wireline Competition Bureau, as well as assistant general counsel. So we're so excited to have Tamara back to talk to Verizon's perspective on this. Next up will be Liz Chamberlain. Liz is the Director of Sustainability at iFixit. And as such, iFixit is focusing on the parts, tools, and documentation you need to complete most electronics repairs. So the iFixit's advocacy team fights for your rights to fix everything you own, and has testified on behalf of right to repair legislation around the country. So, and I know you've been not just popularizing this, but doing a lot of legal writing on this filing. So thanks, Liz, for bringing your perspective on this. And then batting cleanup will be John Bergmeyer, who is legal director at Public Knowledge, where he specializes in telecom, internet, and intellectual property issues, and he advocates for the public interest before courts and policymakers. John was on our event when we talked about net neutrality not super long ago. So let's just make sure we can get Tamara back in here. And you are in again, Tamara. So hopefully you can hear us, and soon enough speak to us as well as soon as we hear from Jeff.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me
We
now?
can hear you now. Thank you.
I got a notice saying the host is blocking my video, so I don't know why you can't see me, but at least you can hear me. So I don't know what's going on.
Well, we can hear you, and hopefully we'll be able to, anyway, we'll at least hear you, but we're going to go first to Jeff. And Jeff, give us your thoughts on the issue as we've discussed it so far.
Great. Thank you, Drew. Good afternoon, everyone. So EchoStar, we're the new entrant in the wireless market under our Boost Mobile brand. And let me start out, what is unlocking? So pretty much every carrier locks your phone when you purchase it. And we have total inconsistency right now in the rules. But in order to switch carriers, you can't just switch a carrier. You have to call the carrier to have that phone unlocked. And I actually recently did this with my in-laws, switching to Boost Mobile from T-Mobile, and it took an hour and a half on the phone to have them unlock the device. As the new entrant, we are fully supportive of what the FCC is proposing to do as part of this rulemaking, which was passed on a bipartisan basis with all 5 commissioners voting for it, to make it easier for customers to switch carriers. We think that's good for competition, good for consumers, and right now it's very confusing for consumers. So EchoStar Boost Mobile, we have a 1-year unlocking period pursuant to a consent decree that we entered into with T-Mobile as part of their merger. T-Mobile has a 1-year unlocking period, but as part of the Mint transaction, they have to unlock Mint phones within 60 days. Verizon has a 60-day unlocking period, and Tamara will go through the reasons why that happened. AT&T has no unlocking period. They could keep the phone locked as long as they want, and pretty much every MVNO has no requirements. So you have a situation where there's no regulatory parity, and consumers don't know the rules. And it's already hard enough to switch carriers, and unlocking makes it extremely difficult. So what we believe the FCC should do is make it easier to automatically unlock devices after 60 days. There is an issue with fraud, and all the carriers see cell phone fraud. But we believe that a 60-day period is more than sufficient, where if someone is paying their bill for 2 months, then it's not a fraudulent account. But then that phone should be automatically unlocked without having to make a call to the carrier, so they could decide, hey, I want to switch to Verizon, I want to leave AT&T, I want to go to Boost Mobile. And we think that is healthy for competition. There is another issue related to unlocking involving porting, that there are obstacles to porting, and the FCC asked some questions about that in the rulemaking. But we encourage the FCC to act on unlocking as soon as possible. To your question, Drew, I think this is something the FCC is prepared to do this year. If it can't get done, I believe it will be done next year, because there's broad support in the record to have regulatory parity, to have a simple rule that doesn't cause consumer confusion, and that allows folks to leave their carrier and switch to another carrier. So we're competing on price, quality of our networks, devices, without making it artificially difficult for consumers to leave. And that's why we as a company hope that the FCC acts on this as quickly as possible.
Awesome. And thank you for laying it out so clearly, and also bonus points for answering my question there that I teed off at the start. Tamara, fingers crossed that we've got both video and audio. I'm going to turn it over to you for up to 5 minutes to kind of lay out Verizon's history on this particular subject.
Great. Thanks so much for having me. Everybody hearing me and seeing me?
Yep.
All right. Scared me for a little bit there. Now, first of all, thanks very much for having me. This is an issue that's very important to Verizon, and one that I have worked on and off since I first joined Verizon in 2008, to give you some sense of where we are. So why is Verizon in a little bit of a different position here? That is because in 2008, the FCC adopted what it called 700 megahertz C-block open access rules. These rules pertain to the 700 megahertz upper C block, which the FCC auctioned along with a lot of other 700 megahertz spectrum that year. And it imposed on the licensee for that spectrum these open access conditions, one of which is handset unlocking. The other conditions about being able to bring your own phone or use whatever apps you want of your choice, things like that, are not at issue here. And they're separate, and we've been complying with them since 2008, no issue. But that means that Verizon won nationwide licenses in the 700 megahertz C block in 2008. So starting in 2008, because that is the base layer of our LTE network for all of our customers. So we sold handsets unlocked, completely unlocked from the get-go, starting in 2008. A little bit about the FCC's decision in 2008. At the time, the world was really different then. If you think about it, this is like pre-iPhone. I mean, it was a very different world in terms of devices, and I think thought more about their relationship with their carrier as opposed to the whole app world that has come out since then. There's much more, all these third-party platforms running on top of your phone. But the FCC said at that time it wanted to test a new regulatory model, is what it called it, and that it would over time observe the real-world effects of that model, and that it couldn't rule out the possibility of unanticipated drawbacks. So that's something I want to emphasize. We started out in sort of an experiment that applied to a sliver of spectrum that Verizon is the majority licensee of now, and that they were going to sort of evaluate this and look for whatever unanticipated drawbacks, which brings us to how we got to a 60-day waiver. As I said, we started selling handsets unlocked in 2008, but in 2019, we asked the FCC for a waiver to allow us to lock devices for 60 days to prevent fraud. We were seeing hundreds of thousands of handsets lost to fraud all the time. The fraudsters were targeting our customers, our handsets, because they knew that they were unlocked, which means fraudsters might impersonate our customers, gain access to their accounts through social engineering or other mechanisms, order a bunch of cell phones, handsets, have them delivered somewhere else. And by the time the customer detected this, they would already have a bill for bunches of handsets they didn't buy. They would be affected by this. They'd have to clean up their financing, their credit records. We would be out the payment for the handset. And this is why we asked for the waiver. 60 days would allow one payment to process and not be reversed in the next cycle. And the FCC granted us that waiver. So since then, we've been operating under, since 2019, a 60-day lock, which we think is sort of the bare minimum necessary to protect both us and our customers. And I will point out that Public Knowledge, and John is on this call, supported us in that waiver because, again, this wasn't just a carrier thing. This was something that was really hurting customers. And it went beyond hurting credit. We had 37 armed robberies because, again, you could go into a Verizon store, run off with a bunch of handsets, they were unlocked, and immediately sell them overseas. So it was a real problem. So we were very grateful, appreciative that the FCC did take into account this sort of unanticipated drawback. So bottom line for Verizon is we think that the FCC is absolutely doing the right thing here in evaluating on a complete record, not just the rules that apply to Verizon or now to TracFone, since we acquired TracFone in 2021, or to Mint and Ultra customers, as Jeff pointed out, as a result of an acquisition, but instead look at this across the entire industry. It's been 17 years since they initially adopted the C block rules, and determine the appropriate locking policy. And in doing so, taking a number of things into account, which I'm sure we'll talk about. Promoting consumer choice, which is the FCC's goal.
I know you. Sorry, my mistake. Go ahead, please continue.
Promoting consumer choice, reducing fraud and associated criminal activity, which raises costs for everybody, including consumers. And also, and we can talk more about this later, just figuring out to the extent to which we want to continue to support the handset subsidy model, which is somewhat unique in this country, where consumers, particularly low-income consumers, can get access to handsets at well below the cost of if you had to go to Apple or wherever to get your handset. So we think the FCC should do this on a full record, and is it doing the exact right thing here? And second, and I'll echo Jeff, he said this better than I can, is that whatever policy the FCC ultimately adopts should apply to all carriers and all consumers. Bottom line is, if handset unlocking is good at 60 days or 180 days, whatever the number is, if it's good for some consumers, it's good for all consumers. And it shouldn't depend on whether you're a Verizon customer or an AT&T customer or an MVNO of one of the cable companies. You should have those choices. Subject to the same rules, and to reduce that confusion, having to navigate multiple different carriers, unlocking policies and procedures, which can be a real friction point for consumers. So I'll stop. I guess I should answer your question. I agree with Jeff. The NPRM here was adopted 5-0 by the FCC, so the Republican commissioners joined in. I think it's a It's a consumer issue that should have legs past this administration if it doesn't get done in the next couple of months. And I think that folks on both sides of these issues think that doing things ad hoc through transactions and as conditions on is not the best way of governing. So again, looking at it holistically and adopting a policy that applies to everybody is something that should have bipartisan support.
Awesome. Thanks very much, Tamara. Liz, let's get your perspective on this topic.
Yeah, hi. I'm Liz Chamberlain. I'm Director of Sustainability at iFixit. iFixit is the one-stop shop for DIY repair. We've got all the parts, tools, and manuals that you need for fixing everything from cell phones to toasters to tractors. We do literally have guides for all of those things. And we submitted a comment on behalf of the Repair Coalition, including the Electronic Frontier Foundation, the Repair.org, US PERG, the Secure and Resilient Futures Foundation, and Waveform. And we're a bipartisan group that believes that consumers should have full access to everything they own. And, our primary focus is repair, but we believe you should be able to get inside your own things. You should have access to your own software. And iFixit, my company, joined the fight against cell phone unlocking in 2013 when the DMCA provision preventing locking expired, and it became illegal to unlock a phone without carrier permission. And we work to advocate for legislation and regulatory change to bring it back to a place where consumers had choice. So we're fully in support of an industry-wide standard to keep competition reasonable. Supporting reasonable competition is a core tenet of our coalition. We called in our comments for a 0-day unlocking requirement, and I realize that's a big ask. But we believe it's important to put out the argument for that, and we pointed to a number of things that we've heard from consumers, from people in our coalition, who've had problems with it, like realizing immediately after buying a new phone that phone doesn't have good coverage around somebody's home or their workplace, and wanting to unlock a handset immediately, knowing that they're never going to be able to use the phone the way they intended originally. Or we heard from people who bought a new phone to travel abroad and only realized when they were in the new country with their phone that they would not be able to unlock it and put in a new SIM. We heard from people that wanted to use the dual SIM feature on a phone to run a personal line on one carrier and a work line on another. All of these things require unlocking, and sometimes sooner than 60 days. And even for folks who meet all the requirements as they exist now, we've heard a lot of complaints about the process of unlocking, that it doesn't often go as easily as it seems like it should, or as easily as it's been promised. I know handset locking has been eliminated in Canada and the UK, and I'd love to hear from Tamara and Jeff in particular about how that's worked in those countries, and whether those countries have found other ways of addressing fraud and theft that might work for us here. But fundamentally, we believe that cell phone locks are anti-consumer, and we're calling for their removal entirely.
Well, thank you for laying out your perspectives here, and I certainly want to ask questions about the time, the consumer's right, and in fact, actually, that's a great segue into John Bergmeyer and your thoughts and public knowledge's thought, having been involved not just in telecom issues for more than 20 years, but also copyright and intellectual property issues. So over to you, John.
Yeah, I mean, obviously coming last, I don't think I need to set out the basics here, broadly in alignment with those favoring unlocking. We supported the FCC's, 60-day time frame because we think that's a good compromise between, 0 and infinity. I would say, this issue really started in like 2006 in the copyright context. That's where when there was a DMCA exemption first granted by the Librarian of Congress for cell phone unlocking, and it became, I think, much more of an issue that sort of grabbed the attention of the sort of broader tech policy community, including public knowledge. I believe it was 2012. and that is around when the exemption expired. Right. So it was like sort of the exemption kind of maybe like went in before it was like a big topic of concern where like industry trained its guns on the issue to prevent it. And then when it became more, it went away. And then it became like a big issue in the DMCA context, obviously before moving also to the FCC, to merger commitments, CTIA commitments, so on and so forth. But I think that's an important table setting because it's important to remember, sort of, contrary to some of the arguments in the record that, unlocking, I mean, is unlocking really a quote unquote regulatory requirement when it's only like government action, the DMCA, that allows carriers and phone manufacturers to have special legal protection for their locks to begin with? I mean, it's not like these phone locks are these like impregnable cryptological fortresses. They're protected by law. When you grant an exemption even to the DMCA to allow unlocking, that's still extremely incomplete because even then the DMCA doesn't allow you to quote unquote traffic in circumvention devices. So even when you sort of grant people the ability to unlock, that doesn't necessarily grant the ability for there to be commercial establishments that do it. So we're in an environment where the government already put its thumb on the scale in favor of locking, and our request here is that look, this is not a good idea to do that, and phone unlocking obviously promotes competition and the ability for people to switch. I think the other thing that I would emphasize too that is it's about people taking their phone to a new carrier. But it's also about the secondary market. It's about people being able to buy cheaper and lower cost phones from a variety of sources, not just have them, through some sort of subsidy model. It's about being able to take your phone and hand it over to, your relatives, your kids. And frankly, I think that's sort of like phone reuse. That's the best way to have, affordable handset options. And I think it's particularly relevant to have policies that ensure that phones, mobile phones, can continue to be used maybe after their first owner is done with them because they just last longer today. The technology has plateaued, which is a good thing, I think. Each new year isn't some huge advance on the next in terms of the next iPhone or the next high-end Android phone where lots of people feel the need to upgrade. That's how laptops have been. That's how cars and refrigerators are. I think that's a natural place for technology to be, and finding ways for it to be reused by others and to have a robust secondary market. I think really promotes the accessibility of handsets. And just in terms of obviously, I think probably the biggest issue is like the subsidy issue. I mean, I just find looking through the studies, different people are using different words to mean different things. So, first we hear I've heard, oh, it's about, carriers that are sort of providing handsets at below cost to users. And, shouldn't that be paid off before they can, sell it or get rid of it or just run away with it, whatever. And it's like, okay, that's an interesting point. And then it turns into, well, it's actually customer acquisition costs. It's like, okay, what does that mean? Does that include customer service, marketing? And I think it's really dangerous to let this concept of, I would say, a subsidy, which is a phone, which is not just offered at a discount off MSRP or on sale, but literally would be a money-losing proposition for the carrier providing it, to sort of conflate that with sales and discounts and nebulous customer acquisition costs and say that all of that has to be taken care of too. Because in one issue, it's like, okay, maybe there's like a real economic barrier, in the other there's not. And I think the burden should be on the carriers to produce clear data to support particular locking periods for particular phones that are offered on that basis. I'll stop now. And then, just completely agree in terms of the political environment. This is a bipartisan issue. This is an issue that has broad customer support. And just, I'll point out, Trump has claimed credit for the McDonald's ice cream machine issue, which is another issue that public knowledge has been working on for years, along with their friends at iFixit and others, specifically in this round with iFixit. Asking the Librarian of Congress for yet another exemption to the DMCA, to allow franchises to repair food equipment, famously, McDonald's franchises to repair their ice cream machines, which are perpetually breaking because it's a terrible design. And look, and I think these sort of like populist economic issues that are about people should be able to do what they want with their property, like I've never really viewed those as particularly progressive issues. I think they're just issues that have broad support among the American people, and I kind of expect that to continue in the new administration.
Well, thank you for those perspectives. I want to kind of use the first question to pop into the issue about, and several of you have highlighted this, that there is a kind of it is unanimous that is, say, the FCC, as one of you said, is 5-0 to get started on this. So is the debate about whether it's going to be or not going to be, or is the debate about whether it's 0 days or 30 or 60 days or 180 days, as some have advocated? So let's just talk about like where the debate is on this topic, and maybe again, those who are critics who don't want it, I mean, what's their response to the argument that, hey, everyone agrees we need it, it's just a question of the number of days?
Drew, it's interesting. The two main opponents of the unlocking rule are AT&T and T-Mobile. T-Mobile, as I said, has a 1-year requirement. AT&T can lock for infinity. And I believe they were invited to this discussion today and declined. And we as the new entrant and Verizon as the established carrier, we want parity so we can more effectively compete. And the primary grounds of AT&T and T-Mobile's objection is legal authority. We believe, and others have commented as well, that the FCC has clear legal authority to regulate the nature of services as it relates to our FCC licenses under Section 303B. And as John and Tamara know, we are subject to many regulations today for our handsets in terms of 911 compliance and Z access and stir shaken, all subject to the Commission's authority as the regulator to adopt policies that promote the public interest. And I think the overwhelming amount of comments were unlocking is damaging to competition, harmful to consumers, it's confusing, it is a barrier to switch. And I think it's going to come down to, because I think the legal authority, I believe, is clear, as I said, is going to come down to the specifics of it. 60, 90, 120 days. There's some proposals to have a different time period for prepaid services versus postpaid services. We believe there should be no distinction, that it should be one simple rule with no exceptions except for fraud, that consumers and carriers, everyone understands what it is and applies equally to everyone.
And Jeff, you're supporting the 60 days as proposed by FCC, is that right?
We are.
So
because,
Liz,
as I said, we think 60 days is sufficient to address fraud.
Okay, so Liz, do you agree that the issue is really about how many days this is going to be? And give us your best case for why 0 is the right answer.
Yeah, I mean, I think clearly in this group, the question is how many days, as Jeff pointed out. The folks who argue otherwise aren't here. The primary argument for 60 days, or excuse me, for 0 days is the same as the argument for 60 days, and that having locks that are difficult for consumers to navigate are bad for consumer choice. It's bad for competition between companies. It means that consumers can't freely move from one carrier to another when situations dictate it. I think ultimately in making the argument that we did for 0 days, we were essentially aligned with all of the arguments that the FCC themselves made in their NPRM. But with the exception, of course, being the protections against fraud and theft. How
do you address the fraud and theft, given that that's a point that Tamara has raised as to why they needed that waiver for 60 days instead of 0 days?
Yeah. I mean, to be perfectly honest, I don't have a perfect answer, and my primary call to Tamara and Jeff would be to ask how it's working in Canada and the UK, where they don't have handset locking at all, and whether in those places, whether there really is significantly more fraud and theft, and what sort of controls have been enacted there that make it possible for those countries to operate without handset locking.
Let's turn to the two of you. Tamara.
Sure. I'm not an expert on what's going on in other countries, but this is what I understand is you just don't have the same subsidy model, that customers in other countries are much more likely to go directly to the OEM, to Apple or Samsung or whatever, and buy a full price device. And that's something, regardless of what the FCC does and mandates for carriers, customers can do here today. If you want an unlocked phone from day one, you can go to your Apple store and get one, and then bring it to whichever carrier's network you want. So it's not an issue that they're not out there. And 60 days, I think, is an extremely short period of time. We said in 2019, we've said again in our comments in this round, this NPRM, that there's almost no customer churn in the first 60 days. It's a very short period of time for a handset to be locked, and after which the customer can then go somewhere else with it. The subsidy issue, as I understand it, it just doesn't really exist. That model is not what's pursued in the UK. It's not what's pursued in Canada. So we could have a different system here where you don't have the ability for low-income customers to get over. One big barrier to entry to connectivity is the price of a handset. And we do sell them, and it's not just a promotion or $100 off of MSRP, which isn't a real price or what have you. I mean, these are deeply discounted handsets, particularly in the prepaid channel, and very good handsets, high-end handsets, and sometimes they're free. And so that I think there is, if we want to, as a policy matter, continue to support that model, then there has to be some way for carriers to recover some of that subsidy through service revenue. And that's why we've advocated for the distinction between prepaid and postpaid. Because postpaid, you finance a device, you have you have credit checks, you have various you don't have to extend that financing, is what I'm saying. Right? You can go and do research and have your algorithms and your credit checks to make sure you have a legitimate customer, and you have options. If there's bad debt, you have options to go to collections or what have you. On the prepaid side, we don't know who those folks are. We have very little information about them. So when we provide a deeply discounted handset and they walk away, if they walked away a month later, we're just out the entire subsidy. So I think that's the difference there.
I do want to let Jeff respond as well, but I want to underscore what you said and make sure. Joe Kane asked a question: is there anything preventing consumers from buying a phone that is unlocked by default now? And your answer is no, there's nothing. It's just the policy of an individual carrier that they have right now. Is that correct, Tamara?
Right. You can go to lots of places and buy phones. You don't have to buy it through your carrier. You don't have to get it from your carrier. But you pay, you might pay $1,500 for that iPhone at the Apple store.
Jeff.
And I agree with Tamara. And I sort of another good question. This is not promoting stealing, because there's other ways to deal with someone signing up for device financing besides locking the phone. You could have their credit card. So if they cancel early, you could hit them for the amount outstanding. You can take it to collections. Locking the phone is artificial, and it is preventing that consumer from switching carriers, even if they're not satisfied with their current carrier. So it is a very blunt instrument that we believe, as the new entrant, is being imposed to make it harder for people to switch, not necessarily to recoup the device financing. But there's alternate ways to address someone from stealing a phone besides locking the device.
But not in the prepaid department. That's a really important distinction. A lot of those tools just do not exist in the prepaid segment because we don't have that relationship with the customer. They go online, they buy a few minutes, and then we never see them again.
So I want to get John in, but again, Ted Vagelos is asking a question saying, if all phones become instantly unlocked, providers will eliminate advanced subsidies and the digital divide will be increased, as smartphones without a subsidy would no longer be affordable for low-income individuals. John, how do you respond to that?
Yeah, there's a few points. One thing I would point out just in response to that is, under this subsidy model, which again, maybe I'm defining it differently to being, phones literally at a loss to the carrier. For each one, it might be different for different models of phone. And in general, once the subsidy is paid off for that user, do they get a discount on their monthly service fees? They don't. That is one, reason why, I welcomed when the device financing model, as opposed to a subsidy model, took hold for postpaid. because, once you're done with your phone, you pay less per month because you no longer have a device payment fee on your bill. That's a lot more fair, and it also, calibrates the amount you're paying to the actual phone you're getting. Because often with subsidy models, what happens is people who get lower cost phones are paying the same service fee as people that got higher cost phones. So effectively, you have it as a regressive policy, where people who presumably have a higher income are getting a better deal. And another just sort of general response is, agree, with the theft from stores, with the mail diversion issue, and I'm well aware that, not organized crime, although who knows, maybe, but there are organized crime, like Verizon. I mean, I remember reading about a T-Mobile retail store just getting robbed so that they could take like the iPad that they use to like unlock devices and look up customer accounts. So I do think that's a real issue. One way to solve it is, just have unlocking happen at the point of sale or, through the mail to the customer, which would be 0 days. But, like I said, in the spirit of compromise between 0 and infinity, 60 days seems to take care of that. And then just the further question, which I suppose is mostly an empirical one, is like, what is the actual effect of, people taking a phone? Like, how often does it actually happen? Because if you have a policy that inconveniences like huge numbers of people, you have one or two, perhaps bad faith actors taking advantage of it. Does that make the entire program impossible or not? I mean, and I think the issue with some of these debates about specific numbers and diversion rates and churn rates and everything is that, just from the outside, I don't necessarily have access to all the data. So that's why I start with, my earlier point, which is I think it's pretty common sense that the best way in general to reduce costs to consumers is to have competition. And unlocking not only just promotes competition between carriers for customers themselves beyond what it currently is, it also broadens the market for increases the supply of devices that customers can have. And I tend to think that'll be the more significant effect than, just giving carriers the ability to just lock devices and make it so you can't, use it with another carrier. I mean, that's an ability that manufacturers of any number of products that are sold under various terms might like to have. And I just really, I admit I start, from the context where I just don't like the idea that people buy something and they think it's theirs, but then, it has this artificial lock that prevents them from passing along or just using it as I say fit. And just in the right to repair context, phone unlocking is like deliberately breaking devices by removing the networks they're compatible with. And it's really hard for me to see how that, given that broader context, that is somehow outweighed by, various, prepaid programs from carriers.
I want to ask our panelists about a filing that was just made I think it was just last week, or maybe even less than a week ago, by the NTIA, National Telecommunications Information Administration. The filing requests in this matter, we urge the FCC to explore ways to further reduce the wait wherever possible, such as when the fraud risk is low or when a customer in good standing makes an unlocking request. So they're asking for less than 60 days. So they're kind of pushing in Liz's direction here. And they're also raising the issue about tablet locking. And again, we haven't specifically talked about that. So let's hear from our panel on both these two issues. Is it reasonable to kind of push for a lesser period of time than 60 days? And where do you all stand on what is the FCC proposed order doing on tablet locks or unlocks? Who wants to tackle this first? Tamara, do you want to?
I can start. NTIA filed, when we sought our waiver in 2019, NTIA filed a similar letter asking for either or less time than 60 days or multiple different time periods depending on circumstances and case by case and all sorts of things like that. And the FCC did not agree on that. We said that we would always, because we do this anyway, if a customer calls with a particular problem, like a fully paid up customer of longstanding needs to go to Vietnam next week or whatever, needs to have their phone unlocked, we can take those sorts of requests. I mean, we actually do want to keep our customers. That is our business. But it's very hard to implement multiple different policies, some 60 days, some less than 60 days. And we just don't have an opportunity in shorter than 60 days to have any indicia that the phone wasn't procured by fraud. So I think NTIA is just wrong on pushing for a shorter period of time. I don't think it's easy to implement. We want all of our salespeople across all of our channels, across the big box stores and everywhere else that we are selling phones to be able to have a uniform 60-day unlock. So that's one thing. And the tablet issue.
Yeah, go ahead. No, please. I'll weigh in after you finish the tablet.
Okay. On the tablet, that's not even raised in the FCC's NPRM. I mean, I was a little taken aback by that because that just seems, even the C block rules that applied to us back in, since 2008 only reference handsets. This seems to me to be a solution in search of a problem. I have just never heard complaints about wearables or tablets or whatever being a problem. But in any event, it's not, I think it's beyond the scope of the FCC's NPRM.
So let's just get some clarity on the rules for postpaid or prepaid. Like, let's just like what is the requirement that you're seeking, Tamara, for, like, if I pay for my phone 60 days, but if I, in other words, is the policy you're proposing that as long as I'm, quote, paying for the phone, I should, as a carrier, be permitted to have it locked? Is that kind of the position you're taking, Tamara?
No, we supported the FCC's 60-day unlocking, and that's even if the device is being financed over 24 months or what have you. That's what we're operating under now. We do not require phones to be fully paid off. Others in the record have certainly made that point. And I'm going to be candid. If the FCC landed on 120 days or 180 days or something like that as a uniform policy that applied to everybody to deal with this financing issue, then we would support it. But in our reply comments, we specifically noted that because AT&T made a big point about device financing, and they wouldn't be able to be as generous in financing terms if they were required to unlock before the device was paid off. And we said we compete head to head with AT&T, and we think our financing terms are as generous as theirs, and we think our credit checks, our credit policy is not more rigorous, and we are also extending credit. So, we have not taken the position that phones have to be locked until they are paid off. Okay. Where we have distinguished is on the prepaid side, where we wanted some more period of time to recover through service revenue some of the subsidy that went into the device. And to John's point, by subsidy, I do mean the actual cost of the device. I'm not talking about customer acquisition costs or marketing or whatever. If we sell a $1,000 device for $500, then we would like what we said for prepaid as 180 days.
Okay, wonderful. Thanks, Jeff.
And Drew, one of the things that we agreed with NTIA on is let's not have a separate prepaid and postpaid rule. Simplicity needs to guide this rulemaking. And the more exceptions that you have, whether it's device financing or fraud or other, not automatic unlocking, it undermines the whole purpose of a uniform unlocking rule, because then carriers could game the exceptions and make it really difficult for consumers to understand. And so whether it's, we think 60 days is the right balance. We also proposed, no more than 90 days. But the most important thing that I think, the four of us agree on is we need uniformity. Locking is bad for competition and hurts consumers. And the FCC has the ability to fix that by having a clear policy that consumers could understand, where they don't have to spend 2 hours on the phone trying to get their phone unlocked so they can switch carriers. And sort of the details and how you actually get at it, the FCC has the record to decide that. But I think the broad strokes of what all of us are urging is positive from a competition consumer angle.
And there's a lot that we agree with, but I just wanted to say this, the automatic unlocking is critical, right? I think everybody has talked about that. You just don't want to have to navigate a really difficult process with your carrier. So if it's automatic, then consumers don't have to worry about that. And NTIA, we certainly agree with NTIA on that it should be automatic, and that shouldn't get lost because it's a huge differentiator.
Thanks for bringing that back up. No, very important point. Let's hear from Liz and then John.
Yeah, I essentially echo Jeff entirely. I think differential regulations for different categories creates more confusion. It would lead us back to the same position we're in now, where there are different internal policies that cause problems with competition and, lead consumers uncertain about whether they've met the requirements for unlocking. It just changes the time periods involved. In general, we're in support of the idea of reducing the time period of unlocking, but I think if it's 30 days for one category and 60 for another and 180 for another, that doesn't really actually result in a benefit to consumers. But as Tamara said, absolutely, we echo the call for automatic unlocking. I think the consumer confusion and the consumer headache of actually making unlocking happen when support service centers are overwhelmed and don't always get back to requests in a timely way. That's the primary complaint that we heard from our community.
John.
Yeah, I mean, one point just in terms of the phones staying in the market is that even when you have a phone, there's not that many wireless carriers in the United States. I'm sad to report. So generally speaking, if a phone is staying in the US at least, and it's like someone switching from one carrier to another, there's going to be phones coming the other way, which I think sort of like further sort of is something to take into account when considering like the economic implications of what this would be. And just on the unlocking point, like what I like to do is, I've sold several used phones, and the site that I like to use is called Swappa. It's very good. They take steps to like prevent fraud and make sure that you actually are buying the device you have and so forth. And when I'm looking at it, I see tons of phones, iPhones from all carriers that like, based on my understanding of the carrier's unlocking policy, are completely eligible to be unlocked, and yet they're not. They're being sold under the AT&T compatible, Verizon compatible, T-Mobile compatible. And by the way, that means that they go for less. So you have people who have phones that they could sell for more unlocked, and they're not because they haven't been unlocked, either because the direct seller doesn't know or because it's passed on to a second or third hand, and that person, the carrier might not unlock it for them. So just in terms of like, I think that's a really big point of reference. It's like, in terms of like looking at data on whether or not phones are being unlocked, it's like, this is like the key category of phones that absolutely should be unlocked, and they're not. Because if you just put up just like a little bit of barrier, if you say, oh, just dial this like code into your handset and your phone will be unlocked and we'll text you. It's like, no, automatic unlocking really does have to mean that, you go to sleep one night and you wake up and then your phone is unlocked with absolutely no action or intervention taken on your part. Because I've also heard, oh, what if you call them and then they automatically unlock it? It's like, no. If you have to call them, it's not automatic, okay? Automatic means completely automatic where it is technologically possible for the individual handset, which of course it might not be for some of them.
Well, John, you made two great points earlier about, in some ways, this quote unquote right to repair provision wouldn't exist. We wouldn't need this exemption from DMCA were there not this, DMCA law that puts a lock on the, technological circumvention. I don't know if others have thoughts on that point, as well as the point you made about this is actually affordability as being able to pass a phone on to someone else or to sell at a discounted cost a phone. I mean, obviously parents get their phones, they pass them on to teenagers and kids and so forth. And that economy you're pointing out, John, is hampered by the mixed array of rules on locking or unlocking. Do any of the three of you want to comment on that briefly?
Yeah, on the point of, I'm sorry, Tamara. On the point of the DMCA, absolutely, the Repair Coalition is fighting for removal of any of the provisions of the DMCA that restrict reuse, that restrict repair. I think it's a misuse of the instrument of the DMCA in general. That wasn't the initial intention of that regulation, and it leads to all kinds of unintended consequences, like people selling phones for lower than their potential value, which leads to less reuse in general. I think there are all kinds of good reasons to eliminate those restrictions. And so we are fighting for national legislation. In the last session, there was the Freedom to Repair Act, which would have eliminated all provisions of the DMCA that restrict repair, and we're hoping for its reintroduction. That's one of our primary policy goals for the next year.
Tamara.
I was only going to add that I don't think a 60-day or a 90-day or 120-day, whatever it is, lock is going to hurt the secondary market for cell phones. I mean, if you're going to a carrier and buying a phone, either financing it or buying a discounted phone, 60-day, waiting 60 days to be able to sell it is not a big burden. Those phones will be on the market soon enough. If you want to switch to another carrier or you want to switch to a different phone and sell that phone, I don't see that 60 or 90 days or whatever is a real burden or an impediment to that. And if you are seeing on the secondary market, I have lots of screenshots. I mean, Verizon phones sell for more because they are unlocked, and they will say so. You can go on eBay, you can go on and look at these things, and you'll see that there is a premium for those unlocked phones, which is a good thing in one sense, but it's bad in that it encourages targeting Verizon customers for first and third party fraud, which is unfortunate.
And George, I just want to make one other point. Cable, they're stealing share, and their mobile business is growing. So Charter and Comcast and the Cable Association are all supportive of a uniform unlocking policy. And I think that's notable. That who's opposed to it? AT&T and T-Mobile, because they are not living under the same regime that Verizon is living under, and they're taking advantage of consumer confusion. We have 82 people on the call right now.
Well, just to be devil's advocate for a quick moment here, Jeff, I mean, why should they be punished for consent decrees that your companies or successor companies entered into?
It's not being punished. It's all for the benefit of consumers and competition, that consumers today are confused. We have 82 people on right now, Drew. Wouldn't it be great if all of us, if we don't like our service—
There's actually many more on other channels.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
I agree.
That's what I see. Many more, hundreds of people. I would imagine everyone would like the ability in a world, if they are dissatisfied with their carrier, to be able to switch without having to call their current carrier, to have their phone unlocked automatically, without having to make the call, without having all the barriers of porting that I mentioned in the beginning. And so they could easily move about carriers. That's what competition is about. So it's not about punishment. It's about regulatory parity, so we could all compete on our products and services and not keep customers because they don't have the time or the desire to be on the phone for 2 hours in order to get their phone unlocked.
Well, we've sped through our time. I want to give each of you a chance to make just a final thought. And as you do so, I think it's been notable that everyone on this call, of course, has really sort of highlighted that this has been a pretty bipartisan measure. You've maybe underscored the uniformity of support for this, while debate on the margins of 60 days, 90 days, 180 days, whatever. I'd love for each of you to, again, anything else you'd like to say in conclusion on this topic, but also, since we are the day after Election Day, what are the other must accomplish items for Jessica Rosenworcel at the FCC to do before another FCC chair becomes empowered? So let's just go in the same order we started. We'll begin with you. Did we start with Tamara? Or we started with Jeff? Jeff.
Nothing more on unlocking. I think we covered it. I think it was a really good discussion highlighting the issues. For EchoStar, we're really pleased that today is the comment period on the CBRS rulemaking to look at ways to improve that ban. And so I think it's going to be a lot of people filing today, and something that, to get the record going, before the next administration on CBRS. It's a ban that is underutilized, that has a lot of potential to help competition and mobility and reduce the cost of deployment. So we look forward to engagement with the FCC in the next few months and then next year on CBRS.
And that, of course, stands for Citizens Broadband Radio Service. Thank you for being with us, Jeff. Tamara.
Yeah, thanks. I guess it's kind of too soon for me to be talking about the next administration, though I will certainly echo Jeff on the CBRS rulemaking, because that's the type of thing that can be very bipartisan. That's in terms of, how do you make the most use of the spectrum that's out there? It's a limited resource, and how do you put it in the hands of people and ensure that it's used fully? So I think we are looking forward. We'll be filing in that, and we're looking forward to backing some of the changes that would make that band even more useful than it already is. So I'm hoping that on some spectrum policy type issues, there can be some bipartisan, you don't have to go pencils down yet on that. I think some of the things that are on Chairwoman Rosenworcel's agenda are not at risk because of a change in the administration. I mean, some of them are, a lot of major initiatives are tied up in the courts. And I think, she has, with whether it's Title II or digital discrimination or data breach reporting, these are things that I think the impediment for her going forward is the legal issues are quite challenging. I did want to echo just one point. The having to do with the uniformity and the customer confusion. I mean, I think we've all said that, and so I won't beat a dead horse. I mean, it is important for a right is meaningless if you don't know how to exercise it, and you run into all sorts of problems. So I think having something that is clean and uniform across the board is the most important thing here. And hopefully the record before the FCC will help them achieve that. And one particular point for Verizon, and AT&T raised this, and you raised it indirectly, Drew, as well, is Verizon trying to get out of the deal that it struck when it bought the C-Block licenses in 2008. And I think this is obvious, but those conditions weren't adopted to punish Verizon, right? It wasn't whoever gets a C-Block, they're going to have to compete with one hand tied behind their back. No, they were adopted to benefit consumers. It was this experiment, this new regulatory model. And so now the FCC is looking at it and saying, does it benefit consumers? Does it benefit consumers in all instances? Did we not account for this fraud issue and armed robberies from stores and all when we had a unlock from the get-go policy imposed on Verizon? Well, their 2019 waiver order says, yeah, that's a legitimate point, and we should now think about that. So they should think about all these things and apply it to all carriers. This isn't a question, like Jeff said, this is for consumers. It's not a punish certain carriers because they have made this deal or they own this license. I don't think that's a constructive way to look at it.
Thanks for circling back to that. And thanks for being with us for this hour, Tamara. Liz and John, brief, quick statements in closing.
Yeah, I'm really heartened to see that we're all in broad agreement on the importance of eliminating confusion and automatic unlocking. The only piece I wanted to pick up that we dangled a little bit was the tablets versus handsets question from the NTIA. We've really struggled with that at iFixit, in that the lines between tablets and handsets have gotten blurrier and blurrier, with phablets and foldable phones. And really, I think for tablets, for wearables, for anything with a dedicated cell line, I don't see why unlocking should be any different.
Great. John, you get the last word.
Sure. I'm just going to say, agree that there are consensus items that the FCC can do. At public knowledge, we're a progressive policy organization that does a lot of FCC stuff. So obviously, we're going to have our work cut out for us. I think with the Trump administration, I would point to the fact that the number of the legal challenges that are, going on with the FCC. Obviously, you'd expect the new administration to have a different position, for example, Title II. But there are some issues, like I don't think it really benefits, the next chair of the FCC to have the Fifth Circuit ruling hanging out there saying that the funding mechanism and the delegation to the FCC to administer universal service, I don't really view that as promoting Donald Trump's agenda. I don't see it as promoting even the interests of industry. It seems to be a very just strange ideological group that brought that. So I hope that there is some, recognition that we need to, preserve some of these institutions, for regardless who's in power.
Well, and that will certainly be a topic of discussion at Broadband in the Trump administration on December 12th. And I should note that Vice President-elect J.D. Vance has been one of the very most vocal supporters of the Affordable Connectivity Program. So that's just another point worth exploring and considering as we think about what the broadband landscape will look like over the next 4 years. Thank you for your time. Tamara, Jeff, Liz, and John. On behalf of them, I'm Drew Clark with Broadband Breakfast. We'll see you next Wednesday at 12 noon Eastern Time. Take care, everyone.